早安，同志们，我的名字是何伟立。当了1983年，我开始学习汉语，在南开大学。这是中国人民共和国，你们都是外国人，别的人听懂我说的话？没有？为什么？我是外国人，你们都是外国人，我们都不是中国人，听懂吗？ Did anyone understand a thing I just said? Please do not be shy. My Chinese is very poor. Anyone? Basically, what I said is that in 1983, I went to China and studied Chinese. Not in China, but in the People's Republic of China. Then I asked you if you understood a thing that I said. But then I also cast a little bit of embarrassment my own way by saying that we are all foreigners when it comes to facing the Chinese threat. So as I go through this, if you have any questions, please stop me and ask me. I love to multitask as I speak. Similarly, I understand that the presentation is being translated in Polish, so if I say something that you don't understand or an acronym that I use that you're not familiar with, please just raise your hand and I will stop and answer that question. You will note that my presentation is PowerPoint. It is military in its orientation, but it will not be death by PowerPoint. All right, so now that we have the rules of engagement. Everyone in this room, I don't care who you are or what government you represent, you've all been hacked. Period. Again, if I say something that's controversial, please do not be shy. I am an introvert by nature, so please, if you have a question, ask me. So everybody agrees that they have been hacked, correct? Oh, good. Now that we've got that out of the way. Yes?
I've never been hacked.
Oh, you have not? Congratulations. You're one of the few.
Or at least I don't know.
Yes. Well, and there are two types of people that have been hacked, and the last presentation gave us a wonderful education into that whole process of how attackers are discovered. And there are two types of people that have been hacked: those that don't know it and don't admit it, or those that know it and won't admit it, right? All right. So here's what we're going to talk about today: China's use of computers and networks as a weapon system. I am going to hit you in the face with Chinese again and again until you appreciate the language. And I do that for impact and effect. There's our abstract. It is in English. I believe it is in the program, Mr. Chair. Is that correct? All right. So I will not bore you with a lot of words. So, Chinese cyber police. The way that one of the methods that they monitor the web and control the internet inside China is municipal cyber police. This particular screenshot is from the Beijing Municipal Cyber Police. So if you, as a Chinese person or as a foreigner, go to a site that is naughty or perhaps contradictory to the Chinese government, you will see one of these avatars come up that you can see up here, and they will say, no, 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 these are naughty sites, you cannot go here. Then you'll get a distinct visit by a net nanny who will make sure that you saw those avatars and do not go to those naughty places. And we'll talk about information control here in a little bit. Who has heard of Project Dragonfly? No one? One or two, hopefully, yes. Well, Project Dragonfly was the basis of anger for a young hacker in the West. Perhaps some would say in the United States. But what he did is he went out, or she, went out to all of the municipal cyber police websites, web servers inside China that were Apache, saw that the administrative credentials for the servers had not been changed. And so he took all of those credentials and dumped them to Pastebin, and you can see the site at the below to your right, my left. I did go out to those sites, and I did log into a couple of those and poked around a little bit, and I did admit that to our federal police, and I'm still here, so you can understand that it was innocent in its orientation. Is Project Dragonfly okay? No, it is not, right? Because if you were to hack another country's law enforcement or government websites, not very nice things could happen. And we all know that unintended consequences could result. And what I'm speaking about is the US Department of Defense's cyber policy. And what is it in a nutshell? Well, it's right up there for you in bold. If the United States proves attribution, because we all know that IP attribution is always 100% and guaranteed, yes, someone over on the left is laughing, which I love, then we reserve the right, men and women with bad haircuts like mine, come to your house or your country and go kinetic on you. Is this effective? No, it is not. In my opinion, it's laughable. Because if you cannot identify your target, you cannot kill it. And we all know that 100% IP attribution is a fallacy. Again, if I'm saying something that's controversial, please stop me. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to push. Welcome to the binary revolution under Mao Zedong. And now we're going to talk about China. Everyone, if you've ever had a briefing by me, knows that map orientation is very, very important. This is the country of China. This is indeed the Middle Kingdom. The unique thing about China is represented by two characters. Zhong means middle, and Guo means kingdom, thus Middle Kingdom. Everything that they do politically, from a hacker's perspective, militarily, and ideologically, revolves around them. They are the center of their universe. If you are not Chinese, you are a foreigner. Period. So, I have written a book on the subject, but you don't write a book to make money. If you could pass this around, sir, and if I could get that at the end, that would be most appreciated. You do it to express an idea that is otherwise not out there. As I was doing research for a second master's thesis, I could not find a book on the subject. So, when you cannot find a book, what do? You write one. No, you do not. Don't do that. Because generally, as I was explaining to the last speaker, it consumes you, and it becomes an obsession. And you don't do it to make money, as I mentioned. You should know that my book is banned in China. What does it take for the Polish government to ban a book? A lot. That's not something to be proud of. If that's not enough, I've written a second book. Published it yesterday, actually, and you'll see it on Amazon here very shortly. I anticipate that this book, twice the size of the last one, will also be banned in China because it talks about what I'm going to be speaking about today. So, is China really the threat? When we look at web-based types of attacks, no, they are not. Actually, my home country, the United States, as well as Great Britain, based on this data, are the protagonists out there in the binary world. So why are we all pointing the finger at China? Why is that? Well, if you go to this Akamai website, on any given minute or second, depending on how quick you can refresh your screen, you can take a look at a heat map of cyber attacks based out of Beijing and other parts of China. In this particular case, it was 114% above normal for this particular window. I took this less than a week ago. But as you can see by other parts of the world, the United States has got a large graph, as does Eastern Europe. So everybody is out there making sure that they know that. So these cyber attacks lead us to who are those adversaries that are out there. When we're talking about the different types of actors out there, we are also talking about nation states such as China, such as Poland, such as the United States, during peacetime and wartime, because it has become a new military dimension, an operational ground from which militaries will protect the national critical infrastructure. Today I'm going to be talking, as I mentioned, particularly about peacetime and wartime and China. I will not touch on cyber terrorists or cyber criminals or criminal organizations. That's where my new research is taking me, which is interesting. We got some prognostications from the last speaker about where the future is going. That would be my prediction is criminal organizations within China taking advantage of you and your country. So this is the first report by the US government that came out and named two nation states that are using the cyber avenue of approach to take advantage of cyber espionage. It named Russia and China. Up until this point, when I went to conferences, the FBI would lean over and say, Bill, sort of in a conspiratorial tone, you must now name the country which shall not be named. And I would look back over them, look at their weapon and their badge and say, you mean China? And here we have a report by my government stating that those two countries are indeed conducting cyber espionage. And if that is not enough, if you have not seen this US magazine, Popular Mechanics, it's an excellent diagram of all of the nation states that are out there, not just China and Russia, but Germany, the United States. And certainly now that we have the revelations from Snowden and his traitorous actions, we know that every country is doing this. So what's the news, right? Let's focus back on China. Who here has heard of Huawei? None? Just one person? Wow. 2, 3? Well, now everyone in the room should raise your hand. Who's heard of Huawei? All right, there we go. Some are sleeping, that's okay. I'm not here to bash any country, company, or organization. Huawei, unfortunately, has become the whipping child of the United States government. And in fact, the House Intelligence Committee, just about a year ago, actually, came out and said that the telecommunications kit manufactured by this Chinese state-owned enterprise, Huawei, can lead this directly to cyber espionage if it is installed in your networks. Wow. You can imagine when I gave this presentation in Australia, the New Zealand telecom manager who had made that purchase decision, he's like, oh my gosh, should I pull all the kit out? Or when I've gone to England, they're like, oh my God, the world is falling. It's like, no, that's not the point. Do not create a witch hunt and pull all of your Huawei kit out. In fact, use it as an opportunity to learn rather than cast aspersions and dispersions in this particular direction. Because I'll tell you what, as the House Intelligence Committee in the United States said that they're bad, a week later, the executive branch of my US government came out and said, we find no evidence of this spying by Huawei. I'm confused, and I've had 3 cups of coffee this morning. Is anybody else following the logic there? No, we are not. It's rather funny. So this report here is exceptionally important as it relates to that, because this ties the economic development of businesses within the United States to those and their counterparts in like industries inside China. What's interesting is during this report in 2012, they actually came out and said point blank that if you do business in China, you need to recognize the fact that state-owned enterprises have ties to the PLA, People's Liberation Army, the Communist Party of China, the CPC, and other entities with the express purpose of stealing your information. So beware. It's unusual because this, up until this point, was a very nice sort of publication that said, China is such a wonderful country, let's go there and drink white wine and get drunk and do business. Now they're talking about beware of the cyber espionage threat from the Middle Kingdom. Now what about that APT1 report from Mandiant? We heard from the last speaker that indeed it is out there, but a contrary point of view has been proposed. And you can imagine with the visibility that I have in the world, I've had it all. People have called me up and say, Bill, you've got to bash Mandiant and APT1. And I'm like, I don't do that. I don't do that. That would be disrespectful and disingenuous to do that. I will, however, offer an alternative point of view. In Taiwan, I met China's #1 hacker less than 2 months ago. His name is Wan Tao at HitCon in Taipei. And there's his picture. Has anyone seen this gentleman before? Eagle Wan? Wan Tao? Anyone? Now you have. You have, of course. He was introduced to me by my Taiwanese hosts as the #1 hacker in China. You can imagine my jaw hitting the floor. I'm like, wow, this is cool. And so we had a very in-depth conversation in Chinese. And one of the questions I asked him was, what about that Mandiant report? And he came right out and said, the information is several years old and not relevant to our hacking situation in China. Wow. He said that in Chinese. Now, unless my Chinese was off, I find that very curious, because he would not have any motivation to say anything other than that. He's about 40 years old, so he's not angry anymore. He's very much genuine in his approach, which is what my experience with Chinese is. They will be genuine if you ask them a direct question. Don't I have any comments from anybody? Please. None? Yes, sir. Oh, all right. Excellent. Yeah, I didn't plant you, did I?
I will say that
yes.
when you release a report that's a compendium of multiple years of research, of course, what's relevant today is rarely what's being discussed today. There's also risks and considerations that have to be made about how quickly you release threat intelligence in that public of a manner.
Absolutely.
And so I do not necessarily disagree with all of what his statement is. And there's also quite a few APT groups out there. So
absolutely.
I concur with him and your point.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, no disrespect intended towards your organization. I would never do that. Towards myself and my organization, absolutely. Now, getting on to May of this year, the U.S. military, specifically the DoD, comes out with a report giving all manner of aspects of the capabilities of China's military. In this year's report, it focused on their use of information warfare and cyber capabilities to defeat their enemies. Not as a new facet, as if they just discovered it, but to say that historically it goes back in time a long time. So let us enter the Matrix. All right? We need to go back to 1949 and Mao Zedong. And what he told his commanders as they were pushing Chiang Kai-shek off to Taiwan and the nationalist threat, the regime in China, he basically told his commanders that we need to create conditions that will deceive our enemy and offer them an alternative point of view so that we can defeat them on every ground that we fight them. That was in 1949, before the internet. You can bet your Polish behinds that they are studying this from a military perspective today. So here is the Chinese perspective in 2011. This is their equivalent of IT magazine or PC magazine that you have and we have here in the Western world. You'll note the shape is that of a kinetic device. And the words within that are cyber war, internet, virus, et cetera, and you can see the detonator tip. What's interesting about this article and the Chinese perspective is these articles are written by the average civilian inside China. They're written by academics. They're written by concerned people. They're written by government officials and academics. People have asked me, well, Bill, is this propaganda? And I said, absolutely it is. But you have to understand, this is their point of view. And the common thread to this quote-unquote propaganda is that the United States is the enemy, not the other way around. This is the Chinese view of the West. Now, what happened in 2010 in the military binary world? Well, United States military created Cyber Command. They militarized the binary domain, saying it is an operational sphere by creating Cyber Command, didn't they? So a year later, you have the Chinese talking about being fearful. So let's talk about the Chinese hackers. And there are 4 groups of them. But first of all, who is China from a mosaic? Well, you've got the Communist Party, you have the military, and you have the communist state. All 3 of those entities make up China today. That is the current regime. Communist Party, the military, and of course, Mao's Little Red Book and communism. So the 4 unofficial groups are Communist Party, as far as hackers go within China, the military, SOEs or state-owned enterprises, those are the commercial companies such as Huawei and ZTE, and then of course our friends Zhongguo Haike, the hacktivists or hackers. In fact, these 2 words right there are Chinese for Haike, which means dark guest. No questions? You're nodding like you have a question. No? Just like your coffee? I don't mean to point you out. Sorry. I know. I'm shy too. Sorry. Okay. Information control in China. By the way, if anybody should be embarrassed, it's me, not you, so I apologize. I'm the one that should be red-faced. Information control in China is very important to understand because they have tried everything from the Great Firewall of China to installing software on computers to making sure that the net nanny comes and visits you if you do something subversive to the government. Now, the Golden Shield project is based on Western technology, Cisco in fact. And you can see the year that it was built at an investment of $800 million. Just last year, the Communist Party came out and said in response to the US government removal of Chinese kit from telecommunications projects in the United States, remove all Western kit from our networks. So that sucking sound you hear in the San Francisco Bay potentially may be Cisco losing a giant contract like this. Who knows what a SmartNet contract is? What is it, sir? It's the maintenance for these devices, isn't it? And it's usually 1.5 times the cost. Yep. So if they're getting rid of all that Cisco and those SmartNet contracts, what does that do to a company like Cisco? Poof. Yes. Am I saying they're going to go out of business? What's that? I didn't say that. Did I say that? I didn't say that. Never. But you can imagine that if the Ministry of Public Security is given a directive by the Chinese government to remove all Cisco kit because Huawei is a threat to the Western world, you can imagine that there's going to be some spine-tingling sensations in San Francisco. Now, Green Dam was a piece of government software installed on every computer sold in China. No, this isn't a computer, it's a MacBook. But you get the idea. So, good, I'm getting some laughs. Good, you were awake this morning. All right. So if you were a Communist Party boy or girl and you had a computer, MacBook, they would install software on there that would determine that if you searched or used a word program or a PowerPoint type of tool or anything, if it said anything in the combination of the Chinese characters that was negative to China, it would shut down at the kernel level of the machine. Oops, can't get those presentations done. We better go drink some Baijiu or white wine. They stopped this after several months because it was creating more problems than it was solving. It was intentional. Its original intent was to protect young men and women from viewing naughty images on the web. And of course, it morphed into, as we know, Project Creep, to protecting against communist regime uprisings. You should know that the military focus of controlling information always has a civilian dimension. You can see it up there. Freedom of search, and freedom of speech are always controlled. Again, if you are not Chinese and you're not doing Chinese things on the web, then you shall not surf safely or at all. Any questions on that? Now, what is the Great Firewall of China? Just to jump back a second, because we have a technical audience here. It's a giant firewall, isn't it? It's a reverse DNS proxy lookup, right? Yes? My website is blocked, yes. You can basically put your URL in there and see if it's blocked in China. Keep that in mind when I get to something here in a second. So the Communist Party in 2010, in response to the United States setting up Cyber Command, said, I want an information base or my own cyber command to protect the critical infrastructure of China against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's what Hu Jintao said. And you can see the motivations are making sure that the Chinese dream of sovereignty as a nation state were retained. The Communist Party has a distinct interest in making sure that everyone within China does not subvert the regime and maintains a consistent and clean approach to looking at the internet. Everyone knows in the audience what happens in China if the regime is unpopular or failing historically, right? Well, what happens is the people rise up, and I think you had that happen here in 1989, right? And that's the biggest fear of this hacking group in China. They want to maintain their legitimacy as a leading power. It's very, very interesting. So purifying the internet was something that the former president, Hu Jintao, had told his communist leaders at his last outgoing party. And basically he said, we must realize the economic power of the internet for our state-owned enterprises, but we should also make sure that those subversive Western ideologies like porn and Falun Gong and other naughty things don't make their way to the average Chinese citizen. So they want to maintain control of the internet, but they also want to realize and maximize its economic potential. But as I mentioned, in 2010, Hu Jintao gathered these 5 generals in the PLA and said, gentlemen, craft me that cyber command and protect us against all those foreign devils that would come to us through the internet. And if you know anything about Chinese history, this goes back to the Boxer Rebellion of the early 1900s when foreign troops were stationed inside China and Beijing. And the Chinese do not want that to ever happen again. And I think Poland had that experience historically, didn't you? It's not pleasant, is it? We in the United States have not had that dilemma. The Chinese have, and they want to make sure that it doesn't happen ever again. So he gathered these 5 generals. And by the way, since I've done my research, some of their names have disappeared from the internet. Don't know why that is. It's a strange thing. But you should really, was that a laugh from somebody? Oh, good. All right. You should understand that these generals that Hu Jintao gathered to create their cyber command are all pure Han Chinese. Has anyone ever met a pure Han Chinese? Is there one in the room? Their skin, and I mean this respectfully, is very distinct. It's yellow and it's wax-like, thus the term yellow Chinese. They're very distinctive as Mandarins in the way they look, the way they react, and the way they treat you. You are all, including myself, subservient to them. You are not a Mandarin. And that's the way they view it as a military, their protection of the country. They're all also card communist members, meaning they have been vetted to be official leaders in the Communist Party of China. They're all technologists, and at the end of the day, 他们都是中国人. They are all Chinese people. They are not Norwegians, they're not Polish, they're not Americans, they are Chinese, above and beyond everything else. So everything they do will support the Middle Kingdom in terms of its moving forward as a country. It's very important. Now, I don't know, in Poland, do you have anyone in the military that is technical? No, I'm being serious. In the United States, we only have 1 general officer. Just 1, and he's in charge of Cyber Command and the NSA. The rest are generalists, as was I. You know how to lead and command troops in combat, but when it comes to fortifying the internet, you have to rely on the technicians. That would be you. Here is the new leader of China. He was an also-ran. His name is Xi Jinping. Certainly you've heard of him. If you haven't now before, you now have heard of his name. What's interesting about him is he was not supposed to be the leader of China. Bo Xilai fell from grace, and his entire political infrastructure fell with him. And what happened to him recently? He was convicted of naughty things and sentenced almost to life in prison. What you should know about him, though, is he has sent his daughter to Harvard under an assumed name. And his wife a 2-star general in the Chinese military who sings opera and loves mascara, is more popular than he is. What's really remarkable about this is when they sent Xi Jinping, Communist Party sent him to the United States to meet with our leadership, they sent him to a swine farm. And in true Chinese communist legacy and history, when you go to a swine farm, it reminds you of home, and that if you mess up or screw up, you will go back to tending the pigs. So when he visited that swine farm in Iowa, they said, do not deviate from the political map that we have for you as a Chinese communist leader, or you will go back to tending swine. Now, what's really interesting, if you look at the date on this, it's March of 2012. We are now looking at what the Chinese military has been given as a task when it comes to IT systems and weaponizing them to protect their country. It is now official doctrine, and it's out there. If you have not seen this slide, take a picture of it, or you can go to my website, and it's up there for posterity's sake. But what's interesting about this is information weapons and the development of viruses to attack other countries will be as much a part and process of defending China from foreign enemies. There you have it. Cat's out of the bag. Which leads us to the second group, Chinese military. And of course, we all know that Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War. How many of you have The Art of War? The true version. Not The Art of Marketing, The Art of Network Management. That's crap, throw it away. Get the true version written by Sun Tzu. If you like that book, you'll like his great-grandson, Sun Ping, who wrote Military Methods, which is actually better. And it talks about the tactics. Do we have an educated man here? You've read that book? You have. Did you like it? Or you're still reading it? Did you like it? Yes, it's very good. It's better than Art of War. Finally, I think you're the first one in all the audiences I've had that has recognized that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. It is good, yes. 1999, War Without Limits came out, or Unrestricted Warfare. Many of you have probably heard of this, and I'll give you the faces of these two gentlemen here in a second. And then in 2000, we had Major General Wang Pufeng, who started to talk about information warfare and is considered the founding father. And then in 2002, we had INU, or Integrated Network Warfare, by Major General Dai Ching-min. So they have been developing this long before the internet. How many of you were on the internet in 1995? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe a dozen. They were already thinking about using it as a weapons platform for operational maneuver and defeating their enemies. I don't think we were doing that in the United States. I know in the military we weren't. We were still laying in Battle Site Zero on a weapon system in order to destroy something. So here you have the cover of Unrestricted Warfare. Does anybody have a copy of that? No? Well, you can go to, it was a significant piece, that's true. You can go to the PLA Publishing House in Beijing and get it, or if you look them up on the web, you can find links to it, but it's all in Chinese. They're the two colonels, by the way, if you've not seen their faces. Here they are staring at you for all posterity's sake. These photos were taken last year. So they do exist. But you can go to Amazon.cn and order the book. Has anyone done that? I have. It's very interesting. It comes just as if it were coming from the United States. It's hilarious. Is there an Amazon.pl? There's not. Do you guys use Amazon? You do? Okay, all right. So you can certainly order it. But that's what the cover of the book looks like. Because up until this point, versions of it had been restricted or removed from the internet by the Chinese and by certain parts of the US government. If you want the English version of this or the Chinese version, send me an email. I will send you the PDF. Don't spend the money and hope that your credit card gets stolen. All right. I didn't say that. I'm sorry. It could happen, though. All right. This is important because this is something that Wang Pufeng had written. And I mentioned that it was written in 2001. Already at that time, and what is today? It's almost 2014. 13 years ago, he was talking about tomorrow's tactics as a methodology for the military to be successful within China against all of her enemies moving forward. Not in the physical space, but in the information world. That was in 2001. What was happening in 2001? Well, we had the attack that started off this war on terror, right? While the rest of the world was focused on terrorism in the physical world, the Chinese were thinking about protecting themselves militarily in the binary world. Now, If you got on Polish TV and said this, what would happen to you? I'm going to create conditions for my adversary that will make them acquiesce or bend to my will, or I will create conditions to topple their government. I know if you got on US TV wearing a military uniform, you would be arrested. Because that's called what? Hacking. Is hacking legal here in Poland? Well, no, it is not. But I can say it in the audience because I'm an American, right? But you cannot talk about it because it is illegal. These gentlemen in military uniform got on Chinese TV, CCTV 7, and said they are instructing the young men and women of the Chinese military to learn how to hack and compromise systems within foreign governments in order to make sure that the political will of the Chinese Communist Party, thank you, maintains its homogeny. Military, the Science of Military Strategy. This is perhaps one of the most remarkable books that just came out. You can see the date was April of this year. Yes, I have a copy. Is it all in Chinese? No, it is not. They've now started to translate it before they release it, letting us know that they have been thinking about the science and the strategy of applying informatization to military tactics and operations from a strategic perspective. Now this is perhaps one of the most important slides. You should take a picture of this. If it's being recorded, all the better. On the 8th of November in China, the Communist Party turned over leadership. That was Hu Jintao's last day in power. And his last act to the military was, ladies and gentlemen, use all information systems to have full combat development by 2020. That was his last words to the commanding authority within the General Staff Director of the PLA. This has not been changed by Xi Jinping. His last orders still stand to this day. And the last slide that I gave you, the Science of Military Strategy, is a further development on that from a tactical and strategic perspective within the Chinese military. What's really interesting is this. Look at the date. A month ago. They are now going back beyond Sun Tzu and Sun Ping and looking at the way ancient Chinese warriors fought and applying some of those combat techniques to the binary world. I did put this up on my website, so if you can't copy the Chinese quick enough, you can certainly go there and look at it. The importance of this is they're using their fierceness as Chinese warriors historically to defeat the enemies in the modern world. The third group are the state-owned enterprises. Huawei, China Telecom, Unicom. Pick the industry, they are state-owned enterprises, and they are owned by the government. Common themes amongst them, and I know you cannot read the Chinese, neither can I very well. I will tell you that organic innovation is absent in most of them. That's number one. Number two, they all have ties to the Communist Party. Who's heard of Lenovo? Okay, who's heard of IBM? Let me back it up a little bit. IBM sold Lenovo, which was what? Desktops and servers to a Chinese company, the Golden Lotus Corporation, known as Lenovo. Guess who both of those organizations are tied directly to? Chinese Academy of Sciences. Guess who the board members of the Chinese Academy of Sciences are? PLA and communist members, every one of them. And they're all very technical, as a matter of fact, as well. Who's heard of Nortel? Canadian telco went into a joint venture with Huawei and ZTE in 2001, didn't they? The security managers, information security managers, that's all of you in the room, were telling the executives of this Canadian company, we're starting to see our innovations in countries that they should not be in. And the executives in their infinite wisdom said, you know what? Don't worry about it. We've got a JV. We've got an agreement with the Chinese companies. There's no way they would steal our intellectual property. There's absolutely no way. And so they ignored them. In fact, when I was in The Hague this year, a young man came up. I thought he was going to hug me. He's like, how did you know all this information? It's like, well, it's open source now. He's like, I lived through that. It did happen. I was one of those technical guys telling the executives to watch this. So effectively, a Canadian company, #1 in the world, next to perhaps Alcatel and Lucent, went from becoming Canadian to Chinese. And then the Canadian government issued a super secret memo warning everybody to beware of these threats. And then, of course, we've all heard of Apple. Many of their inventions have been claimed to be of Chinese origin. So this is not direct intellectual property theft, it's economic extortion. If you do not register your innovation in China properly, a Chinese person or company will claim it as their own. The Chinese government will support that Chinese claim, and you, as a Western company, will have to pay the economic extortion. Right now, Apple has lost the iPhone, they have lost Siri, they have lost the MacBook, they have lost the iPad because they did not register them correctly, to the tune of $6 million, direct loss. And why is this such a big deal? Because $7.9 billion in potential revenue in China is too big of a target to ignore. Would you pay $6 million to access 7.9? Where are my business guys in the room? I would. That's a no-brainer. I'd pay that economic extortion. And then the last group are the hackers or the dark guests. They are the unofficial proxy for the Chinese government. If you or your country or company says anything negative about the Chinese government, these hackers will come after you and deface your website. There are too many examples in history to list for you. Codera is probably the largest one. They were a web hosting company in Arizona, the United States of Arizona. One person put up some anti-Chinese rhetoric. These hacktivists or the dark guests took down the entire web farm. So if your business was hanging off that Codera web farm, it was brought down along with everybody else. They pull and they take no prisoners. I asked Wan Tao, why are Chinese hackers so effective? And this is his response. They're angry young men and women who want to prove, quote unquote, that they can violate the Chinese government. And the 3 young lads that were with him could not look me in the eye. Maybe it was my haircut or the fact that I have an Eagle Globe and Anchor on my tie pin. But I could almost feel the distaste coming off their lips when they looked at me. But this is what he said. All right, there's the long history, and it's ongoing. It's like daily, isn't it? I'm going to skip through some of the conclusions, but one of the biggest ones I want you to recognize is that any Western information security technology that's out there is ineffective against the Chinese threat. Doesn't work. Nobody's going to challenge me? Come on. Oh. Well, Chinese written malware, rats, and botnets are virtually undiscoverable. Now, what did we hear from the last speaker? Excellent forensic discussion. I wish I could squeeze his brain and put it in mine. People are the most important thing, not shiny new objects. 100% right. If you don't know how to use the system, it's ineffective, which tells me that if people are educated properly and doing the right things, they're going to discover this stuff. Chinese threat of cyber espionage is done. It is no more. The new threat is the Chinese criminal impact and effect of using those techniques, tactics, and procedures, the TTPs, that they use to gather knowledge for the state for criminal enterprise purposes. And I have an entire brief on that I cannot share with you unless you're credentialed law enforcement or military only. How's that for a teaser? Yes, I said it. All right. Civis pacem parabellum. What does that mean in Roman? What? Are you an educated man, sir? What does it mean?
Do you want peace? Prepare for war.
Yes, sir. If you want peace, prepare for war. Thank you very much. You must be a soldier, right? If you want peace, prepare for war. That's a very unpopular thing in the United States because we've been at war now for most of my adult life. Here is a resource for you. If somebody comes and does not give you a resource, shame on them. Please take a snapshot of this. I believe one of your organizers has this slide, or at least the credentials. You can log on to my website. When I'm not on the road, which is 90% of the time, I'm updating it or putting articles out there. Please use it as a resource, please. And then, of course, here's how you get a hold of me. Whoops, sorry. There you go. Click, click, snap, snap. Or send me an email. Who knows what an OPML file is? If I know it, everyone in this room should. No? I have an OPML file, which is essentially an aggregated newsreader feed. It does troll all of the information security websites, from forensics all the way through threat intelligence. It is heavy on Russia, China, and Iran. If you want that file, send me an email and I'd be happy to get it to you. And then, of course, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm very prolific. And then I have a website as well. So, are there any other questions? No questions? Any questions?
Szanowni Państwo, zapraszamy
Do ask questions, ladies and gentlemen. I was not able to interpret half of the slides either.
to interpret half of the words on your presentation. Because we are not Chinese, you almost are.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Are there any questions? Please don't be shy. Yes, sir. Yes.
What you're basically saying is that the Chinese are pretty good at what they are doing right now, and the whole ecosystem is the Chinese ecosystem is something which helps to actually achieve the attitude they have right now. And I was wondering if you were to point one thing, two things, or something that would help Western companies to be able to keep up with this, let's call it cyber warfare, what would it be?
Wow. So let me restate your question, make sure I understand it, because I'm not that smart. I'm really not. So the entire cyber ecosystem in China is changing, correct? And how, essentially in a nutshell, should Western companies protect themselves? Yes. Well, I mean, the simple, and I'm not being facetious when I say this, would be to learn Chinese. But I've been trying since 1979, and I still can't speak it. I think the most important thing is not get enamored as a technologist with the technology, or as a business person with the beauty of a JV, like we saw from Nortel, but understand what the Chinese culture and people want. You can rest assured that if you have something of an innovative nature, or an idea, or a procedure that they want, they will take it. My suggestion to you is find that out before they steal it, and then sell it to them and make some money rather than watching it go out the door and have somebody like Mandarin come in and tell you that you've already been screwed. Fair enough? Yes.
Thank you very much for that extremely fair answer. Czy są jeszcze jakieś pytania?
Any other questions?
This is the most disrespectful slide I'll give you while we're waiting for a question. Yes.
Maybe this question is off topic, but why they should buy something from us, either stealing?
Again,
Why do they buy something if they can steal it?
yes, the gentleman's question was, why sell it to them when they're going to steal it anyway?
Yeah.
Wow. Then, do you work for a commercial company, sir? Then you might as well hand in your 2-week notice right now and resign, because you're essentially giving up. Do not give up, and I'm not directing that at you personally or professionally. If you think that you are already defeated, then you are. How many have been to war? Well, I'll tell you what, I went to war, and there is no such thing as second place. You know what second place is? It's a body bag. Commercial world, don't have that perspective. It's like, oh, well, we lost the secrets. Time for a coffee break.
Na szczęście mówimy tylko, proszę Państwa,
Fortunately, we are talking about the economic aspects, not war itself.